Hi, this is Ali Arango of Little Guy CGI, and today I would like to show you how to make a human male body mesh inside of Blender 2.79. So let's get started. Okay, if this is your first time in Blender, I recommend you go to File, User Preferences, go to Input, and then choose Select with left click. Blender's default select is with right click, and this may confuse you if you're coming from Adobe programs or other 3D programs. Also, while you're in here, go to add-ons, put check marks next to these different add-ons that I'm going to show you now. 3D View : 3D Navigation, 3D View : Display Tools, Mesh : Auto Mirror, Mesh : F2, Mesh : Inset Polygon, Mesh : Loop Tools, Mesh : Relax, Object : Skinify Rig, Pie Menu : 3D Viewport Pie Menus, Pie Menu : UI Pie Menu Official, rigging : Rigify. So all of those things I just mentioned, that is what you want to have check marks next to make sure that you have these add-ons activated to work your way with me as we go through this tutorial. Okay, when you first come into Blender, you see this default cube right here. To manipulate your view in Blender, if you hold the middle mouse button, you can rotate your view. If you hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button, you can pan. You can zoom in by rolling the mouse wheel in, or zoom out by rolling the mouse wheel out. You can have a smooth zoom by holding Control and then holding the middle mouse button and pushing in. Also holding Control and holding the middle mouse button, if you pull out, you can have a smooth zoom out. Okay, if you look to your left-hand side, if you click on this display tab, you'll see these different buttons right here. You can use these buttons to maneuver your view around Blender, and we'll be using these buttons as we work through this tutorial today. Okay, recently I made a tutorial on making a human male base head mesh using Blender 2.79. This tutorial doesn't have to go with that tutorial. However, these tutorials will work well together. Also, since I made the head mesh, I figured why not make a body mesh in a similar fashion as the head mesh tutorial. So that is pretty much what this tutorial is going to do. We're going to work using a basic base mesh, and then we're going to make that into a fairly detailed male body mesh. Okay, previously when I would show how to make a male body mesh, we would start off with this cube, put some subdivisions on it, and basically work our way up to, actually work our way pretty much through the whole mesh. Here in Blender 2.79, there are some amazing new add-ons. One of the new add-ons allows us to pretty much start with a very basic body mesh and then work our way up from there. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to click front view. We're in front perspective view. Here, perspective view is kind of like a 3D view. We want to be in front orthographic view. Orthographic view is kind of like a blueprint view. It's a way of looking at 3D objects like they are 2D objects. So see this button right here that says view perspective / ortho. We're going to click this. So now we're in front orthographic view. We're going to click on the cube. The cube is currently selected. You can tell that the cube is selected because it has this orange outline around it. We're not going to use this cube, so we're going to press X to bring up the delete menu. Then we're going to left click to delete that cube. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to hold Shift. While holding Shift, we're going to press A. This brings up our Add To menu. We're then going to go to armature. We're then going to move our mouse to the right, then down to basic. We're then going to go to where we see this says basic human meta rig. I'm then going to left click here, and then here now you can see that basic human meta rig. Okay, now I'm going to move my mouse about here. I'm going to hold shift. While holding shift, I'm going to press B. Then I'm going to draw a zoom box right here. So we just zoom right into this armature. Okay, you might be saying to yourself, well, if we are making a, male human base mesh, why are we looking at an armature? The reason why we're looking at an armature is because of this spectacular add-on in Blender 2.79. And what that add-on is with this armature selected, what we're going to do is go here. Currently we're on object mode. We're going to click one of these arrows here. We're then going to go to pose mode by left clicking here. Okay, now that we're here in pose mode, we're going to look to this menu right here. We're going to look for right here. We're going to left click here. We're then going to scroll down. Then when we scroll down, we see this option that says Skinify Rig. Now that spectacular add-on that I mentioned to you, that is Skinify Rig, and these are the options for that add-on. And what this add-on does is, in Blender 2.79, you have multiple armatures. I mean, you have a good amount of armatures. You have all kinds of different armatures. One of the armatures is this one right here. Now, one of the advantages of an armature is the armature is in the basic shape of a person, right? Okay, so Skinify Rig, what it does is it takes advantage of this basic shape and it lets us put mesh over top of the armature. So these options right here will just allow us to affect how that initial mesh that goes over top of this armature looks. Okay, so for these options, we're going to click here. We're going to press 2 and then press enter. So we have 2 here. We're going to look to these different settings here. We're going to click on fill gaps. We're also going to click on solid shape. Okay, now that we have those settings set up, we're going to look at this button right here that says add shape. We're going to left click right here. And now we can see that there is mesh added on top of the armature. Okay, now what's interesting is this mesh isn't just on top of the armature, it's actually connected to that armature. So because that's the case, what we're going to do is we're going to click here. We're then going to look to where we see X-ray. We're going to put a check mark here. Now we can see our armature inside of our mesh. Okay, because this mesh is actually attached to this armature, when you look at the mesh, you can see how close the legs are to together. So what we're going to do is click here. We're going to press R to rotate on the Y axis like that, just to give us some distance away from that leg. We want this leg to do the same thing as this leg. So what we're going to do is go down to our copy pose button and left click like I just did. We're then going to go to our copy reverse pose button, which is right here, and then I'm going to left click. So now this leg, is doing the same pose as this leg in reverse. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to press A to deselect. We're then going to click here to go to object mode. We want to be selected on our mesh, so we're going to click here. So now we have our mesh selected. Previously we had the armature selected. Now we have the mesh selected. Okay, so with the mesh selected, you can tell the mesh is selected because it has that orange outline around it. We're going to click here to go to our modifier tab. Okay, these are the settings for the armature that's connected to our mesh. We want our mesh to remain in this current pose, so we're going to click apply. Okay, so now that we clicked apply, our mesh will remain in this pose. Okay, with that done, what we want to do is to separate our mesh from our armature. Is this absolutely necessary for what we're going to do? No. However, I just prefer to separate the mesh. So to separate it, what we're going to do is hold Alt while holding Alt, press P. This brings up our clear parent menu. I'm then going to left click on clear parent. I'm now going to click on our armature here. When you look here, these boxes are different layers in Blender. This box that's highlighted right here is the current layer we're on. I want to move the armature to another layer. I'm going to move it to this layer right here. So with the armature selected, I'm going to press the M key. This brings up our move to layer. This is the layer I want to move to, which if you look down towards the bottom where our layer is at, you can kind of see how this correlates with, the layers down there. So I'm going to left click. So now you see this dot right here. That's where our armature is at. So if we want to go back to this armature, it's right there. Okay, so what is good about having this mesh? The good thing is we have the basic shape of a human being. The nice thing is because we're mainly going to be using sculpting, this gives us a nice way to start. Recently, I've been learning a lot more about sculpting, and my current thoughts on sculpting compared to box modeling, which most of the tutorials I've done on this channel have dealt with box modeling. My current thoughts on sculpting as well as box modeling are I'll use box modeling where it's most effective, and then I'll use sculpting where it's most effective. So we're going to adjust this character before we go into sculpting mode, and the best way that I think to do that currently is to do that in edit mode. So we're going to click on our character. You can tell our character is clicked on because we have this orange outline around it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click here, and then we're going to click here to select edit mode. Okay, here in edit mode, we have our mesh here. We can manipulate our mesh by vertices, edges, as well as faces. You can select vertices here, edges here, as well as faces here. Okay, when you work in 3D, you can save time by when you're working with bisymmetrical creatures like humans. When I say bisymmetrical, basically what I mean is for the most part, this side is basically the same as this side. So when you're working in 3D, you can save time by setting up what in Blender is called a mirror modifier. And what the mirror modifier does is essentially the work that's done on this side is also done on this side. Here in Blender 2.79, we can easily set up a mirror modifier by clicking on our Tools tab and then scrolling down, and then looking here to where we see Auto Mirror. We'll click this black triangle. Then we'll click here for Auto Mirror, and now Blender has set up a mirror modifier for us that quick. So this is Blender 2.79 where you have this option, and it is spectacular. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press A to deselect. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time in here. I really want to get to sculpting mode. So there's multiple ways of what we're going to do. What we are doing here. We want to change the proportions slightly, so I'm going to do that just the fastest way that I can currently think of. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here to go to face select. We're then going to press Z and then click here to go to wireframe mode. Okay, the reason why we came to wireframe mode was so we could select the front as well as the back of this mesh. The way I have my current settings for Blender, if we went to select without being in wireframe mode, we would only select what we can see visibly in the front. The back would be unselected. What we want to do here is we want to hide the geometry that we don't want to have affected. So I'm going to hold Control. While holding Control, hold the right mouse button. I'm going to draw a lasso select like this to select the lower portion of our body. I'm then going to press H to hide that. I'm then going to move my mouse here. I'm going to hold Control. While holding Control, hold the right mouse button and then draw a lasso select right here to hide our head. I'm going to press H to hide that. So now I'm going to press A to select everything. I'm going to pull to the side. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hold Control. While holding Control, I'm going to hold the right mouse button. I'm going to select here. Press H to hide that. I'm going to press A to select everything. I'm then going to pull to the side like that. Then going to press A to deselect, hold Alt. While holding Alt, press H. This brought back our hidden geometry. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to press Z, then go to solid view. I'm going to click here to go to edge select. I'm going to press O to turn on our proportional editing tool. Our proportional editing tool, you can see that it's on because you can see this blue circle. Proportional editing tool allows you to manipulate more than one vertice, edge, or face at a time. It's very useful for organic things. I rolled the mouse wheel to zoom in. I'm going to click here, hold shift, then click there. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm going to press G so I can see the area of influence for my proportional editing tool. I'm going to roll my mouse to shrink it, left click, and then I'm going to press G and then X to move in like that. On the x-axis, I'm going to left click to lock that in. I'm then going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here to go to face select. I'm going to press C for paint select. Select right here. I'm doing this because I want to push out the chest area. I'm going to press G to move on the y-axis like this. I rolled my mouse wheel to increase the area of influence of the proportional editing tool. When I did that, the rest of the mesh changed somewhat accordingly. I'm going to click here, press G, then Y, like that. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to click here, go to face select, click here. Then I'm going to press G and then Y. To adjust things like that. And then I'm going to press A to deselect. Click here, hold shift and click here. I'm going to press G, then Y. Left click to lock that in, then press A to deselect. Hold the middle mouse button to take a look. Okay, currently we have edge select on. Right here is about our elbow area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, I'm going to select here. Because I was holding Alt, I selected this entire loop of faces. Now I'm going to press S to scale. Hold the middle mouse button to take a look. And I'm doing that just, an elbow pretty much goes in. Right there. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hold Alt. Select right here. Because I was holding Alt, I selected that entire loop. I'm going to press S to scale that in. I'm going to press S to scale on the Y-axis here like that. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm now looking for the knee area. I'm going to hold Alt, then select here. Go like this. Push that forward just slightly. I'm going to press S to scale on the X-axis like that. Held the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to press S to scale on the Y-axis like that. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hold Alt, then click right here. I'm going to press S to scale on the X-axis like that. Hold the mouse button to rotate. I'm going to press S to scale on the Y-axis like that. I'm then going to press A to deselect. Okay, what I'm going to do is hold Alt, select right here. I'm going to press G and then Z. Move down like that. I'm then going to press S to scale on the X-axis like this. Then I'm going to left click to lock that in. Hold the middle mouse button to turn to the side. And I'm going to press S to scale on the Y-axis. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel like that. I'm then going to press A to deselect. Hold the middle mouse button, just looking as well as thinking. I'm going to hold Alt, then click here. I'm then going to press S to scale. like that. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hold Alt, then click here, then press S to scale, like that. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm holding the middle mouse button to take a look. Okay, now we can finish the rest of our preparations for going to sculpt mode. When you look here, you see these faces here. You can look at the faces and get a general idea of how much geometry we have to work with. One of the advantages of box modeling is box modeling does not tend to take a lot of computer power. Sculpting does tend to take more computer power. To sculpt effectively, we'll need more geometry than this. There's multiple ways of getting that geometry. What we're going to do is we're going to click here. We're going to go to object mode. So here we are in object mode. What we're going to do now is we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier onto this mesh to increase its geometry. We could click here and then select subdivision surface, and that will put a subdivision surface on there. There's a shortcut that's useful to know about. I want you to know about it. Pretty much does the same thing. It does that, and it puts a subdivision surface modifier onto your mesh with a view of 2. You do that by holding Control. While holding Control, you press 2. And that subdivision surface, you can see, is added right here. Okay, in the past, typically, we would model, get around to this point, then we would put a subdivision surface modifier on, in the process of our modeling. The main reason we put this on now was to increase our geometry. Typically in the past, you would, click this to make it look like the subdivision surface modifier was applied to our character mesh. Because we're using this mainly to get more geometry for sculpting, what we're going to do is left click apply. So now that geometry is actually applied to our character mesh. Also, when working with sculpt mode typically doesn't tend to like the mirror modifier, so we're going to click apply for that as well. What we're going to do now is we're going to click add modifier, and then we're going to go right here where we see this multi-resolution modifier. We're going to left click here. Now we have this multi-resolution modifier. This adds even more geometry onto our mesh. And what we're going to do is, it didn't add the geometry yet. It's just ready to add the geometry. How do we add the geometry to our mesh? We click subdivide. So we're going to click once and then click again. Now that we have this geometry onto our mesh, we're going to click here and then click here to go to sculpt mode. Okay, here we are in sculpt mode. We're going to scroll up. Here we see the draw brush. We're going to click on here. We can see the different brushes in sculpt mode. To give you a quick overview of the brushes, this allows you to add geometry. This is probably my favorite brush in sculpt mode. This allows you to add geometry. This allows you to also add geometry. Most people's brush in sculpt mode that tends to be their favorite tends to be this one. This allows you to add detail. And I'm going to explain the brushes that I use and we'll probably be using throughout this tutorial. I'm going to skip over the ones I really don't use too much. The flatten brush allows you to flatten geometry, very similar to the smooth brush. Grab brush lets you grab and pull geometry. The inflate brush lets you add mask to geometry in a very smooth way. The mask brush allows you to protect geometry, which allows you to do very specific things, and as you sculpt, it's easier to show you than to explain it, I think. The pinch brush acts similar to the crease brush. The draw brush acts similar to the blob, the clay, as well as the clay strips brush. The smooth brush you use almost constantly. You use it so much that in Blender, when you hold shift, you automatically activate the smooth brush regardless of what brush you're currently on. The snake brush works similar to the grab brush. However, it actually adds geometry as you move the geometry, so it is extremely useful. Okay, I'm going to hold them in a mouse button to take a look at our character mesh. We want to get the general mass of the things that we want here in sculpt mode. So to do that, we're going to click here. We're then going to click on the inflate brush. I'm going to press F to increase the size of my brush. When you press F, you can push in or pull out, and then that will increase the size of your brush. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just move, I'm left clicking, and I'm just adding mass to our character's thighs here. Okay, now I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to take a look. Okay, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to rotate. I'm just going to left click and release. That's what I'm doing right here. I'm moving my mouse a little bit to the side because see where the point is? Right where that point's at, Blender will try to add the function of the brush to right where you're pointing at. So by going to the side, I'm actually able to direct where the inflate brush is working towards. So here I am left clicking to add mass here. Now I'm left clicking and dragging here. I'm going to left click and drag here. I'm going to hold shift in the middle mouse button to pan. Okay, now we're going to add mass to our mesh. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to click here. This is my method. There's multiple ways of doing it. This is just my particular method. I'm going to left click and drag here. Then I'm going to left click and drag here. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. Basically what I did with pretty much one stroke right here, I made mass to work on a chest muscle, and then I made mass as far as our abdominal muscle. Now I'm going to zoom in, and then I'm going to left click and drag. I'm going to start from here, and I'm going to go up and around. I'm going to dodge that going too much into the chest. Taking a look. And basically what this is representing the rib cage right there. Okay, with that done and that mass put there, now I'm going to hold them the mouse button to turn towards the back. Okay, here in the back, we're going to adjust for some latimus dorsi muscles. We're going to click here. We're going to go to the grab brush. I'm going to press F to increase our area of influence. We're going to pull to the side like that. Like that. Let's click here, then click here to add some mass to that. Just taking a look. Okay, I'm going to hold them the mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to zoom in by rolling the mouse wheel in. I'm going to click the grab brush, zoom in some more. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan down. Pulling out this area just to represent the face. I'm going to hold shift. When I hold shift, regardless of what brush that we're selected on, we automatically, whenever we left click, switch to the smooth brush. It is extremely useful. So I'm just left clicking here. I'm now going to click here. What I'm doing is trying to set up some geometry around the neck area. I'm going to hold shift to smooth this out. Now I'm just left clicking. I'm going to hold shift here. I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to rotate the view. By the way, as we work in here, you should be aware that sculpting mode does tend to take a lot of computer power. If you look right here where it says triangles, we have 289,280 triangles. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on this. If you start to have issues while working with your mesh where your computer starts to slow down, you can separate this mesh to make things easier as you work. So you could separate the arms, the legs, the head, and then basically you could have those objects separated on different layers, and then basically work them independently, which would make less of a load on your computer. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to click here, go to the blob brush. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button and pan. I'm going to zoom in. We want to form the basic muscles of the back. I'm going to press F to increase our brush size. So I'm going to drag here, and basically what I'm doing is forming a general shape for trapezius muscles here. I'm going to press F to decrease the size of the brush. I'm going to come down here just for the muscles in the back there. I'm going to move my brush away from the trapezius muscle. I'm going to basically make a circular shape right here. Once I have that circular shape with this little space in between, now I'm going to left click in between that circular shape and then come around like this. And then I'm going to zoom in, and then underneath that I'm going to put like a line kind of like that. It's just a general forms of the back. I'm going to add in right here just some muscle for the trapezius. Then I can hold shift and smooth that out. I can just press F, increase our area of influence, draw a line for the bicep muscle there. By the way, if you're wondering why what we do on this side is shown on the other side, even though we don't have a mirror modifier on this, it's because sculpting has its own version of the mirror modifier, so it is set up to mirror what's done on this side to the other side. However, you can turn that option off. If you look here, see where it says symmetry, if you click here, see this X, so we're mirroring this geometry to the other side. If we wanted to turn it off, we could just click here, and then we could turn off that geometry, so the work on this side would be different from the work on that side. Okay, for the forearm, we're going to left click here and kind of imagine a thumb being there. We're going to build up this mass that kind of comes from like the elbow region here and then goes down here. And we'll just put a stroke there to represent that. The underside of the forearm. Okay, I'm going to roll the mouse wheel back. Take a look. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. Okay, let's zoom in. Holding shift and middle mouse button to pan. We're going to click here, then go to the crease brush. What we're going to do is press F to shrink the size of our brush. There's a split right here. So we are just taking that crease brush and holding down our left mouse button. And the crease brush, gives us this split right here. So we'll take it up like that. The crease brush is extremely nice. I had mentioned before for shaping muscle, so we're just going over the underside here, and hope you can see that it just works very well. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan up. Okay, so what we want to do is take the crease brush here and just go across like that. Once we have that, then we go to the center like this. Pull the middle mouse button to take a look. Hold the center here. We can just come to the side, and the crease brush just lets us add in detail. It is very nice. Zooming back to take a look. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to click here to go to the blob brush. See right here where the latiss dorsi muscle is coming out? We're going to left click and drag from that, come to here. So we're aiming from here to this first abdominal or visible abdominal muscle you can see right there. Then right underneath, we're just dragging again right here, and then again right here like that. Okay, now what we're going to do is hold the middle mouse button to rotate towards the back. I'm going to press F to increase the size of my brush, then left click. This space right here, I'm basically filling in this space with the blob brush. Then what we want to do is where it fills in here, I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. We're going to press F, shrink the size of our brush, and then have this run down like that. I'm just zooming the middle mouse button to zooming. I rolled the middle mouse button. Then we're going to hold shift, smooth this in like that. We can hold shift to smooth this in here. Now once we have the basic shape in sculpt mode, we can click here, go to the grab brush. Then we can actually adjust that shape. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. And we can pull out to the side. And we can hold shift to smooth some of that in. Then we can take the crease brush and adjust the detail. We're still putting the basic shapes in, so I mean you don't want to adjust things too much. But pretty cool. Okay, what we're going to do is zoom in, hold shift and middle mouse button. I'm going to click here, go to the blob brush. I find that for the legs, it's good to put this middle quadricep muscle in here. Then click here, go to the crease brush. And basically put in your quadricep muscles by, for the most part, cutting them in. I should say your teardrops by cutting them in. And teardrops, you know, they look like teardrops. So what we're going to do now is click on the blob brush. We're going to click right here. Form a knee. Underneath the knee, you want the shape that kind of cups the knee. And then underneath that, you want this tendon that runs down the front of the shin. Like that. Okay, what we're going to do now is click here, go to the snake hook brush. We're going to press F to increase our brush. We're going to pull out like that. Take a look. We'll go to display, right view. We'll pull right down from the hill is what you want to do. Click here to go back to right view. We'll be careful of pulling out just the the side to the front. That's why I'm going to the top view. I'm going to press F. I'm just pushing down there. I'm just trying to shape here in a fairly quick way. I'm holding them in a mouse button to rotate. I'm going to click here, then click the flatten brush. With the flatten brush, I'm going to left click and drag. So I did that once. Now I'm doing it again. For this, I'm going to press F, shrink my brush, hold shift. Okay, so I held shift to put smooth. Smooth is not working that efficiently, so the flat brush is great to use as a smooth brush when smooth doesn't seem to be that working efficiently. So now we're just left clicking here to smooth that out with the flatten brush. I'm going to zoom back. Click here, go back to the snake hook brush. Press F to increase the size of my brush. Holding shift and the mouse button to pan. I'm holding shift to smooth. Just left clicking again and again while holding shift to smooth. Now taking a look. Okay, what we're going to do is roll our mouse wheel, zoom in. We're going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. We're going to look right here towards this hand. Press F to increase the size of the brush. I'm going to pull this forward like that. I'm going to click here, go to the flatten brush. Go like that. Now I'm going to click here to go to the snake hook brush. I'm going to press F to decrease the size of my brush. Okay, I'm going to click here and then click here to go to the flatten brush. I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to press F to increase the size of our brush, and I'm going to click there. Now I held them in the mouse button to rotate. I'm going to click here. Okay, we're going to click here, go to the snake hook brush, zoom in, hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan, hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to click here. Pull out a thumb. Pull out another finger. Screen capture software, I think, is fighting me a little. Okay, let's go to our flake brush. We'll hold shift. Actually, let's click to go to our flatten brush. Just using the flatten brush to actually shape some of the wrist. I'll go to the snake hook brush. Pull in something like that. Back to the flatten brush. Go to the snake hook brush. See, I'm using a snake hook brush to actually change the direction some of our fingers. Just holding the middle mouse button, rotating, and hold shift in the middle mouse button. That's smooth. Okay, so it is coming along. Flatten brush. If you hear me go silent, it's because my brain is most likely seriously concentrating. Okay, for here, we're just going to go across like that. Holding shift in the mouse button pan. We're still in the blob brush. So we'll just like this. We'll hold shift to smooth this out some. We'll click here to go to our crease brush. Just putting some detail on the calf. Just hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view for there. We'll click here to go to the blob brush. Hold shift the middle mouse button to pan. Make that thicker there. I held shift as well as the middle mouse button to after the blob brush to smooth it. So now we're using the crease brush just to make this separation here. Well, since we're here, add some detail here. Click here, I'm going to go to the grab brush. Okay, I'm going to press F to increase the size of my brush. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to zoom back. I want to decrease the thickness of the body from front to back. Hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. Okay, we're going to use the mask tool to help us do this. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to click front, so we're in front orthographic. We don't have to actually click. I'm going to click here. This is the mask tool right here. However, we don't have to click on that brush to use it. What we can do is hover here, press B for box select, then whatever inside of this box is masked and protected. So now we're going to press B again, draw a box here. Now this is masked and protected. So now we'll roll the mouse wheel back. We'll actually hover here, we'll press B, draw a box here. Now that's masked and protected as well. So now with all of that, we can press F, increase the area of influence of our brush. And just like that, fairly easily, deal with that thickness. I'm going to press F and decrease the size of our brush. Okay, so now I'm going to click display. I'm going to click front again. I'm going to zoom back. And what I'm going to do is press F to increase the size of the brush. And now I'm going to adjust some of our mask here. I'm going to click on tools, click here, go to the snake hook brush. Now I'm going to press B for box select, select here. Press F to increase the size of the brush, and I'm going to raise up our head some, zoom in. I'm going to press B for box select here. Have to decrease the size of the brush there. Now I'm going to hold Alt then press M to take away the mask tool. And then these sharp edges here, we can just come in, be careful, but hold Shift and smooth to deal with them. And you can also, come in and readjust. Lost detail, you can come back in with the crease brush. So like right here, that's lost. We'll come in, crease brush, press F, and pretty much we have that back. Like that. It's right here, same thing. Just left clicking for flatten that out. And this right here, what we're going to do is press F, grab this area, lift it up, press Shift, click here, inflate brush. Just zooming back to take a look. Zooming in. I'm just zooming and rotating and, you know, adjusting things, you know, for what we just, because of what we just did. This right here, this shoulder, what we want to do with this is actually kind of grab this end here, pull this over here like that. You can actually pull that forward like that, push up there like that. Pull that forward, pull that back. For this, we'll just shift, look at that. It's nice. We'll click here, we'll go to the inflate brush. We'll inflate this underside here. We'll go to the shoulders here, we'll inflate them. We look for sharp edges like this, hold Shift, smooth them down. Click here, set a elbow there. Put a stroke here, stroke here. Put an inflate brush to add a tricep. Let's go to grab. A lot of things you see me doing here, it's just you know, adjusting muscles. I recommend for people for 3D to definitely, I would say, draw, because it's very strange how drawing kind of goes back and forth. I'm clicking here, putting in a brachialis muscle here. It's interesting how drawing skills and 3D skills, I find they go back and forth. The 3D tends to make you better at drawing. Then you draw and it tends to go back to 3D. It's interesting. So I'm just adjusting proportions that I want to adjust. Just left clicking to do that there. Okay, what we're going to do now is click here, go to the blob brush, zoom in. Let's press F. Imagine the ears are right here, so we're going to come down just like this. Now we'll press F, smooth that there. Click here like this. Click here. Using that inflate brush to just bring these traps forward some. Then this here, I'll just hold Shift, then inflate again. I was inflating and smoothing back to back basically there. here. Okay, let's zoom in here. Just using a flat brush right here. I click the inflate brush to inflate these muscles here. I'm going to hold shift to decrease them some there. Now I'll go to the crease brush. Bring back some of the detail that was lost. Let's go to our hand. And a lot of this now is just looking and adjusting. Grab this, pull that over like that. Hold shift. I'll click here, go to the flatten brush. Like that. That's the flatten brush there. F to decrease the area of the brush. Go to inflate. And I'm just looking at, basically thinking about the basic, pads in your hand right there. I'm using this flatten brush to basically shape the wrist. Okay, we want to work on the hands and have geometry added just to the hands, not to the entire body. If we wanted to add geometry to the entire body, we could click subdivide. I want it just for the hands, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, go to object mode. I'm going to click here to apply that multi-resolution modifier. I'm going to come back here. I'm then going to go back to scope mode. I'm then going to look to where we see dynamic typology. I'm going to put a check mark right here. Click OK. I'm going to click this black triangle here. I'm going to click where we see detail 12. I'm going to change this to 10. I am then going to click here, go to the clay strips, zoom in, and now Blender will give us the geometry where we need it. So I'm using the clay strips brush to increase geometry to the fingers. And that is what Blender is doing. It's very cool. I'm going to click here, go to the inflate brush. And I'm just increasing the size of the fingers. I'm now going to hold shift to smooth that out. When we went to dynamic typology, we got this this flat shading here. We can click here to get back to smooth shading. I'm going to click here, go to the blob brush, and I'm basically putting in knuckles. Roll the mouse wheel to zoom back, holding the middle mouse button to rotate. So now I'm going to press F to shrink my brush. I'm going to just draw right up from the wrist. Over the fingers. Like that. Gotta zoom back. Hold the middle mouse button. To rotate, I'm gonna hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. Zoom in here. I'm gonna go to the flatten brush. Press F. Flatten out some of this area here. This right here, sometimes you'll see areas act a certain way because of dynamic typology. Usually holding shift or going to the clay strips, putting down some clay strips in the area, and then smoothing most of the time will solve your issues for you. I'm holding control now to put that space in between the pads here. Okay, I'm going to hold shift here to smooth that out. Things like this, we can increase the size of our brush, and we can hold shift and add smoothness here. Hold shift here. And most of our mesh is done. You could keep refining this. One thing that is nice is I tend to like more stylistic characters. One of the things you can do, see this right here. Suppose I want to make this sharper to have this have a more stylistic look. Basically, what I'm using is I'm using a flat brush to flatten this out. By doing that, I'm kind of getting an edge here. Now I can go to the crease brush, press F to increase this. I'll press and hold control. And now when I'm holding control, I'm doing the opposite of a crease. And you see what's happening? It's giving me that sharp edge there. Now one thing you will see with the crease, not the crease, the dynamic typology is kind of like that. That happens as Blender tries to deal with, bringing in new geometry. I'm going to click, go back to here, press F. Pretty much do the same thing here. And what you can do is I can click here. I'm going to change this to 5.8. So now we'll have even more detail. You want to be careful and think about the power of your computer, because we are adding, actually adding new geometry. I'm going to click here, go to the crease brush, hold control. And what this is doing is giving me this sharp, stylistic look that I like. So if you don't like this, you can be like, hey, I don't like it. You don't have to do it. Same thing here. Just go to the crease, hold control. It gives me that kind of sharp look. And pretty much, if you like that look, like I like it, you can kind of do this, around the whole body. So I'm just holding control, and it's just giving me those hard, sharp edges. The biceps, the same thing. You pretty much can put it wherever you want that edge. So you basically are looking for edges, and it's kind of strange because you're kind of flattening them out. But by flattening it out, you are creating basically two edges, and then you can just come up along the one edge and hold this crease brush, and it's great for just adding in that detail. Oops, wrong brush. You'll do that from time to time, like you just saw me doing that. Did that because that was the wrong. But you also don't have to do the. You don't have to do the flatten if you like the stylistic look. You can just hold control, and you'll get that. You will get that that hard line look just by holding control and using the crease brush. And you can, as soon as you let go of control, you have, your crease back again. So I'm just adding sharpness, for a more stylistic look. I'm holding control again. If you get artifacts, you can kind of smooth that out. Now I'm letting go of the crease brush. I'm actually putting in detail there. Same thing here. So long story short, the modeling sculpting is basically done. I'm just adding detail to this now, and actually putting in how I want this to look. Okay, so suppose you want to put trunks on this guy. What you can do is click here, go to object mode. With this selected, hold shift while holding shift, press D. I have a duplicate made. I'm going to press M. I'm going to move the duplicate to another layer. I'm then going to click on that layer. So now I have the duplicate selected. I'm going to click here, go to edit mode. I'm then going to press Z, go to wireframe mode. I'm going to go to display mode. I'm going to click front. So we're in front orthographic. I just held shift and the middle mouse button to pan. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hover my mouse here, press B for box select. Go like that to drag basic shape of trunks. I'm going to hold shift, press D, right click. Kind of hard to see there, but I just made new geometry. I'm going to press P. This brings up our separate menu. I'm then going to choose selection. I'm then going to click here, go to object mode. I'll press Z, go to solid view. I'll click here. So these are the trunks here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, go to edit mode. I'm going to press A to deselect. Or A to select, sorry. I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, press S. And then I'm just going to pull out. That's my proportional editing tool. You don't need to have that on. So basically what I did, I just made the trunks bigger. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to press O to turn off my proportional editing tool. So now we have these trunks. We have this space right here, right? one thing we have the muscle in there too. Let's click here, go to sculpt mode. Let's go to our tools, click here. We'll just click on this smooth brush and we'll smooth out the muscle that we don't want to have, at least so prominently. We'll click here, go back to object mode. Okay, what we'll do now is we'll click here to add a solidify modifier. So there's the solidify modifier. You can see it a little there. Here's our options. The solidify modifier increases thickness. So by moving this up, you can see I increased the thickness there. There's an issue here. The solidify modifier, I'm going to hold the mouse button to rotate. It increases thickness over your entire mesh. That's why we have that issue there. However, we can look to this option here, only rim. We'll put a check mark here, and now it basically, it being the solidify modifier, puts this only where the rim is, which is nice. Okay, what we're going to do now is click here to apply our solidify modifier. We'll click on our duplicate mesh. We'll press X, then choose to delete that. We'll click on our shorts here. We'll hold shift. We're currently on this layer. I'm holding shift now. I'm going to, while holding shift, click here. I let go of shift. So now we see the second layer that our shorts are on, as well as the first layer that our original mesh is on. Now with this selected, what we'll do is we'll click here and then click here to go into sculpt mode. Okay, here in sculpt mode, we'll zoom in. We'll hold shift and the mouse button to pan. And we'll use this smooth brush. Most of the time we just held shift to get it, but we're actually on it now. We'll just use this to smooth out those rough edges. Okay, what we can do now is click here to go to the crease brush, zoom in, and then what we can do is hold control, and that'll give us a nice sharp edge to these shorts. By the way, this is one of the ways that you can make clothes for your characters. Okay, I'm holding control and just adding a crease here. Hold them in the mouse button, rotate. Okay, you see how thick this is at the top. If you click here, go to the pinch brush. I'm going to press F to make this brush bigger. If you aim, see where the tip of my pointer is at? If you aim towards there, the pinch brush works similar to the crease brush, but it'll actually help you in decreasing the thickness of things like this edge. So pretty cool. If the edge starts to get too sharp for you, you can hold shift. So that took away that edge, and now I'm using the pinch brush again to go in more. And the pinch brush is dragging in more, but also making this sharp again. So okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to click here. We're going to go to object mode. We're going to zoom back. We're going to click on our main mesh. We're going to hover here. We're going to left click and drag. We're doing this so we can add some color to our mesh. We're going to click here. We're going to set this to UV/image editor. We're going to go to display here. We're going to click front. So we're in front orthographic mode. We're currently clicked on this mesh. We're going to click here. We're going to go to edit mode. We're going to press A to select our entire mesh. We're going to press U. This brings up our UV mapping menu. We're then going to select Smart UV Project. We're then going to click OK. And it's taking a while because that is a lot of geometry. Normally what we would do is we would, retypologize this. And that's what you would want to do as far as animation. However, just to put a color on it, this should do the job for us. So Blender right now is just trying to figure out how it's going to lay out a UV. There it goes. Okay, when you look to your left here, you can see this is a UV map that Blender made for us. The UV map is basically our 3D mesh laid out flat here. What we're going to do now is we're going to click New. This new image menu popped up. We're going to click here. We're going to name this AO. Where this says 1024, we're going to left click there. We're going to type in 2048. We're going to left click here, type in 2048 here. And then the rest of these options are fine for now. We're going to click OK. So what Blender did was it made an image to go with that UV map. So when you look here, see where it says image, it has this asterisk sign here. What we want to do is click image. We then want to click save as image. We then want to go somewhere where we know where this is going to go to. And we can click here to make a new folder. So I'm going to name this textures. Press enter. I'll then click here to go inside of that folder. And then now I'll click save as image. So now when you look here, that little asterisk sign is gone because that image is saved. When you save a Blender file, the image file is not saved. It's not typically saved with the Blender file. So you want to make sure this is saved so that you don't lose any of your work. Okay, so I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here, then click here to go to object mode. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to click here. Then we're going to scroll down to where we see this option for bake. We're going to click here. Right where we see this bake mode full render, we're going to click here. Then we're going to select ambient occlusion. Okay, ambient occlusion is a way of showing light typically on a texture. It tends to make textures look better. I'm showing you the way I'm using it now. You could use it for the normal way, and that's fine. It would make your mesh look most likely better. We're going to use it to make it look like our mesh has skim pores. So what we're going to do is with our mesh here selected, and with us having previously made up the UV map, as well as having set up an image to be with that map, as well as having saved that image with that was previously done. Now we're just going to come here and click bake. Then you can see the progress up here. Here is the UV image of that ambient occlusion, or I should say the ambient occlusion texture. Here's the that baked texture right here. So when you look here, you see this image with the little asterisk sign. I'm going to click here. I'm then going to click save as image. And because this is the actual image we want, I'm just going to click save as image to go right over top of that other image. So now with this ambient occlusion saved here, one of the things that ambient occlusion does, it kind of has a grain depending on the setting you pick. We picked the default setting, so it has kind of like a grain to it. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of that grain. So Currently we are in solid view mode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. I'm then going to click here to go to material mode. Now here in material mode, we because of our lighting, we can't see our mesh that well. However, in Blender 2.79, there's a new add-on called Try Lighting. That's what we're going to do now. Is we're going to hold Shift. While holding Shift, press A. We're going to go down to where we see lighting sets. Then we're going to click Add Try Lighting. Previously, you would have had to set up your own lighting. Blender 2.79 makes this easy. We're going to zoom back because that's too bright. We're going to click on this light right here. We're then going to click here. See where it says energy 3.000. We're going to click there. We're going to change this to 0.5 and then press enter to lock that in. So now the light isn't as bright. I'm going to lower this down even more. Okay, what we're going to do now is click on our mesh. We're then going to click material, then click new, then click texture here. We're going to click new. Now we see this is the type image or movie. That's what we want. We could click open and search for the texture we made, which is AO. However, when we click one of these arrows, typically Blender knows the texture that you were working with. So we'll just left click here. Then what we want to do is scroll down here to where we see influence. We don't want this color. So we're going to unclick the color here. What we want is this right here, which is the geometry. So we're going to put a check mark here. And now you can see, all of this right here, which is too much. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here. Let's try 0.5 and then press enter. Still looks like too much. So we'll click here again. Let's try 0.2 and then press enter. Okay, we're going to click here and then we're going to put in 0.05 and then press enter. And I think that looks good. Okay, what we want to do now is we want to click here, go to texture paint mode. We want to click tools. When you look here, you can see here's a brush. When we click here, we can see our different texture paint brushes. I'm going to click here. Our brushes are very similar to Sculpt mode. When I press F, I can decrease the size of the brush. When you click here on slots, currently we are selected on AO. This is what we're using for our skin pores. We don't want to paint on this. What we want to do is paint on a new paint slot. So what we're going to do is click here and then click diffuse color. Now what we want to do is we want to change this to 2048 by 2048. Press enter. This is going to be the main color of our flesh. I'm going to click here. It doesn't look like there's color here. When I click this to take this up, we can now pick a color. Okay, we can also put a name in here instead of the material diffuse color. For now, I'm just going to leave that as it is. I'm going to click OK, and now you can see here is a color on our mesh. I'm going to click here for our material tab, and then for the specular intensity, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to change this to 0.05 and then press enter to lock that in. Okay, what we want to do now is we want to click here and then select material diffuse color. We then want to look here where it says image. We can see this asterisk sign here. So this means this texture isn't saved. So we're going to click here and then select save as image. We can then click save as image. So now when we look here to this image, we don't see that asterisk sign because this image is now saved. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to click here, go to object mode. We're going to click on our shorts. We're already on the material tab. We're going to click new. We're going to pick a color for the shorts. Then what we're going to do is take the specularity all the way down to 0. Okay, with these shorts selected, I'm going to click here, go to scope mode. I'm going to click here, go to the blob brush, zoom in. I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to press F, decrease the size of the brush, and then I'm just going to pull like this. I'm then going to press F, increase the size of the brush, click here, just inflate the wrinkles here some. I'm going to click here, go back to the blob brush, press F, push in. I'm going to hold control and go in between the wrinkles. I'm going to zoom back some. I'm going to press F to increase the size of the brush. I'm going to hold shift and then soften the wrinkles up some. I'm now going to click here and then click here to come back to object mode. I'm then going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm going to press A to deselect. Okay, what I'm going to do now is see what looks like this little triangular shape here. I'm going to left click and drag this to the left. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. Okay, now I'm holding the middle mouse button, just taking a look. Okay guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel and we share them, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe and thank you for viewing.